Welcome to the Modern Medicine Movement Podcast with Dr. Thomas Hemingway. Have you ever looked in the mirror and said to yourself, I thought I'd be healthier, in better shape, feel better both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and be further along in my life? If so, come on this journey with my dad as he explores all things health and wellness from a holistic medical perspective, even as a classically trained physician. He'll share integrative strategies to optimize health and inspire you to join the modern medicine movement.
Welcome, and a big aloha from Hawaii. I am broadcasting and looking out the window. It is beautiful day. I think we're in fall, but holy crap, it's like summer over here. It's been so hot. We are so ready for some change in season over here. It's been so hot, so humid, no natural air conditioning at all. We typically have these trade winds, which bless us with basically air conditioning, as we describe it. We open up the window, we let the wind blow through the house, and it cools us down because contrary to popular belief, most of us who live in Hawaii do not have air conditioning. So we're like suffering this summer, fall, whatever it is, because it's been so stinking hot. And the last couple of weeks, we've lost our natural air conditioning or our trade winds. It's been dead calm, which, you know, I try not to complain too much because it's stinking beautiful and it makes for some great, smooth, Malia, just glassy conditions in the ocean and the water for surfing. My boys and I have been having great mornings. We get up super early, go surfing together, and then we start the homeschool session after our just amazing protein and cholesterol and saturated fat rich breakfast, which usually includes my favorite couple items, eggs and avocado, and I think we threw in some bacon for good measure yesterday. I don't eat bacon too often, but once in a while I sure like the taste of it. It's so salty and, oh man. Anyway, it's a beautiful day in Hawaii. I want to just thank you guys for listening. Oh my gosh, I'm just humbled by you guys. It's so fun to share with you guys awesome and helpful and up-to-date, information on health and wellness, and I'm just excited to be on this journey with you. I love you guys. I appreciate your feedback. It's so meaningful to me. It just keeps me going. It's been rough the last few months with the whole, pandemic, and I'm right in the thick of it. I work in the ER. I'm just seeing any number of, both casualties based upon that, as well as a lot of downstream and other effects, the despair and everything else. It's been kind of a gnarly few months, but I think we're turning the corner. People are waking up. People are, realizing that it's not the end of the world. We're going to get through this, and I really believe we will, and we shall. And we're gonna be more resilient because of it. We're gonna be better. And so hang in there. Things are getting better. We'll continue to get better. We are in this together. We're on this journey together. So thank you for the feedback. If you haven't done so already, please shout me out, share the podcast. Please give me a review on Apple Podcasts. Super easy to do. Just go to Apple Podcasts, scroll down to the bottom where you see those 5 stars, click on the star farthest to the right, 5 stars, and then type up a little review or that little square icon with the little pencil heading up and to the right that's there. You just click on that, type up a couple words, tell me what you're loving. Tell me, a little bit about what you're enjoying on the podcast. Super grateful for you. I'm going to give a shout out to our review of the week right now. It's Edge D-Bar. It's entitled Great Show! 5-star review. And it says, quote, "This doctor is amazing, shares important topics in a simple and easy to understand format. Very down to earth, and you can feel that he truly cares about the listener." Oh my gosh, this just touches my heart and soul. Thank you for that review. I do care about you guys. I do this for you. I just love to share important and useful and applicable information that can change your life, change the quality of your life on a day-to-day basis, and try to share things that are interesting scientifically as well as down to earth and practical. I don't like to get you all overwhelmed. I like to keep it simple. I like to keep it meaningful and not make it too difficult. For my programs, you don't have to bust out, a big, long, protracted list of everything you put in your mouth. We try to keep it real simple and keep it, practical and useful and repeatable. So thank you for that feedback. Please share, please listen. Follow me on Facebook at Modern Medicine Movement Podcast, or you can just look me up, Thomas Hemingway. Follow me. It's 1M, just like Ernest spelled Hemingway. We got the same names, pretty cool. Also, I'm on Instagram at Aloha Surf Doc or at Modern Medicine Movement Podcast, or you can just look me up on the web at modernmedicinemovement.com. On that website, you can click on a link there, which has my latest podcast, as well as send me an email at Modern Medicine Movement Podcast at gmail.com. I'm kind of old school. I'm more responsive to emails than I am to things on Facebook Messenger. I just try to not do too much time on social media, but I do answer emails pretty readily. So reach out to me there. Today's topic, guys, this is such a cool topic because not only is it super interesting, but it's common, and it is literally, as stated by the WHO on their website, it is the most common nutrient deficiency in the whole world. The absolute most common nutrient deficiency. What do you think that might be? Think about it for a moment. The most common, according to the WHO, in the entire world. Well, drum roll, please. Drum roll. Here we go. It is dun, 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 dun. No, not AC/DC, but you guys ever heard of the Iron Man theme song? I love Iron Man. My kids and I just get a blast off of listening to the soundtrack, the Back in Black that's on AC/DC. We listen to that before we jump on our mountain bikes and hit the jump line and catch air. We just get all pumped up with the Iron Man theme music. Oh my gosh, cracks us up. But iron is it. Iron is the most common nutrient deficiency in the world. Iron. All right. So what the heck? Why is it so common? Let me just read from the WHO website. It says, and I quote, "Iron deficiency is the most common and widespread nutritional disorder in the world, as well as affecting a large number of children and women in developing countries. It is also the only nutrient deficiency which is also significantly prevalent in industrialized countries. The numbers are staggering. 2 billion people, a third of the world's population, are anemic." Guys, that's why I'm talking about this. I only talk about stuff that's important and relevant. And this is really, really relevant. I mean, sometimes I like the nuance about, nitty-gritty details and micronutrients and less, common things, because that's cool. And it's sciencey, and it can also help us health-wise. But this is so stinking common. Almost 1 in 3 of us are anemic, and most of it is from iron deficiency. 2 billion people in the world. Guys, this is a big issue. So listen up. You're going to learn some cool stuff. Share it with friends and family, many of whom may be iron deficient, because it's frequent in all countries, developed, less developed, whatever. Even it gets more common in less developed, not only because of nutritional deficiencies, but also they have infectious diseases, like you may have heard of things like malaria, hookworm, schistosomiasis, HIV, AIDS, other infections such as tuberculosis, which are huge contributing factors to the direct blood loss or what's called anemia of chronic disease. So iron deficiency, so common. Affects more people by number, right? 2 billion than any other condition. So it is a great public health consideration, and it's really of epidemic proportions. Iron deficiency, so common. So let's get down to it. Let's talk about it. I mean, it's really important, because if we're anemic, we can't enjoy life as much, right? We have low energy. We aren't able to do the things that we want to do because we get tired. We get out of breath. We just don't have the capacity and the zest and the pump that we would if we had a full tank of gas, so to speak. Sometimes in the ER, one of the most common tests that we do, right, is a blood count or a CBC, which is called a complete blood count. And a couple of the markers in there are hemoglobin and hematocrit, which directly measures basically the iron in the blood, right? More or less, and there's lots of other iron tests, which I may get around to talking about today, or I may not. We'll see how it rolls. But iron is the central, most important part of how we can carry and deliver oxygen to our bodies in the form of, you guys have heard it, I'm sure, hemoglobin, right? Heme, the heme molecule. It's such a cool molecule. I actually busted out my old college biochemistry book by Vote and Vote for all you guys who have taken biochemistry. It's like a classic textbook. Not only is it super detailed, it has lots of chemical formula, structures, pictures of both electron microscope and diagrams of what the hemoglobin molecule looks like. And if you go right to the center of this molecule, right to the center of it, what do you see? Nothing but our good friend iron. It is at the center, and it is actually what oxygen binds to that gives blood that bright red color. If you're oxygenated and you have a good amount of heme or iron in your blood, you have that nice red oxygenated blood. Or if you have a low iron count, it directly affects you, and you might look more pale because you won't have that sort of red glow from these significant quantities of iron and oxygenated iron or hemoglobin, which will give you that nice red color. So right in the center of the heme component, or the hemoglobin, which is the bigger protein molecule, which carries oxygen in our blood, and it is literally bound to iron. So it is this sort of main component of this oxygen-carrying molecule, which is the main component of our red blood cells, which binds to oxygen and transports it throughout our body so we can survive, so we can live, and hopefully we can thrive. And primarily we get iron from two sources in our diet. We can get it from what's called heme iron, which is the type of iron that we have in our bodies, right? It's found in our blood. It's found in our muscle. It's found in meat. And basically this heme iron, not surprisingly, is the most well absorbed of all of the irons out there because it's the kind we have. We recognize it. It's natural. It's well absorbed. It's found in animal foods only. This is not found in plant foods, the natural occurring heme iron, right? Red meat, those of us that partake of steak or other red meats like I did this week earlier. I had a bison burger that I prepared for my family a few nights ago, which was amazing. Grass-fed, grass-finished. A few days before that, we had tri-tip. And I don't eat meat every single day, but I eat it because it's part of my diet, and it provides me with this natural occurring heme iron, which is well absorbed. There's also a non-heme iron, and this is found both in plant and animal foods. It's a little more common, but it's not that well absorbed, right? We think of the dark green leafy vegetables, the kales and spinach and things like that. There's iron in there, but it's just not nearly as well absorbed as that in the meats, especially like organ meats, for example, liver. Tons of iron in there. Tons of it. Iron is essential. And so in the non-animal form, or I should say the non-heme form, that's the more correct term, it's not absorbed as well, but you can try to enhance it if you take it with things like vitamin C, for example. But caveat, some vitamins like calcium will actually decrease the absorption of iron. So later we'll talk about if you take supplemental iron, you want to take it by itself. You don't want to take it with a handful of other supplements as it may not be as well absorbed. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but if you take it with vitamin C, that will actually increase the absorption. Anyway, as I mentioned at the outset, iron deficiency is so common, probably the most common nutrient deficiency in the whole world, affecting more than 30% of people worldwide. And unfortunately, this number is as high as almost 50% in young children. Super, super common. Young pre-Ks, 48% is the presence of iron deficiency. And also about 30% of young ladies who are menstruating can also be deficient in iron because of their monthly menses, or their monthly period where they lose some blood. And also 42% of young pregnant women are deficient. So this is all just to reinforce how very, very common it is. And if you don't know if you're iron deficient or not, super easy to get checked out. There's some very simple blood tests most doctors would be willing to do to check out to see if you have this, because like I said, it's almost 1 in 3 people worldwide. Super, 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 super common. And the most common consequence of iron deficiency is referred to as, you guessed it, anemia, in which your red blood cell count actually drops, right? And your blood's oxygen carrying capacity drops. Because remember, as I detailed in the very beginning, hemoglobin, the oxygen carrying molecule in our bodies, and the red blood cells at the center, what does it have? It has an iron right in the center of it, which binds to the oxygen. So here's just a quick rundown of a couple of ways we can get iron. As mentioned, the animal heme containing heme iron from, for example, red meat. If you had like a 3-ounce steak or something, that would have 85 grams, and it would provide about 30% of the daily value. So you could eat like 3-ounce steaks a day. That would do it. Or just organ meat has quite a bit more, has more than 50% of the daily recommended amount. Shellfish has some iron as well. Oysters in particular, if you happen to like oysters, they have an excellent source of this more easily absorbed iron called the heme iron. Up to 85 grams of cooked oysters can pack in about 50% of your RDA of iron. Sardines. Now here's a funny story. We had an amazing trip to Mexico, and they prepared you guessed it, most common, nice, yummy salad worldwide that a lot of us like to eat, Caesar salad, and they prepared it with sardines, which was cool because even my wife got to kind of sample a little bit of it. I asked for an extra serving of sardines because I knew about this fact that they are a great source of natural heme iron. And so if you want to sneak in some sardines with your Caesar salad, I think that's a great way to do it. There's also sardines. You can just eat them directly or put them on a gluten-free, non-GMO cracker or something, or chip, and you can eat them that way. I like them just as well, like that, but my wife thinks they're a little bit stinky. But sardines are awesome because they also have this natural heme iron. And then for some of the non-heme sources, beans have good amount, and cooked. Obviously, you want to cook your beans. You don't want to eat beans raw for a lot of reasons, which we can talk about at a later podcast, all the phytochemicals and things that they're actually not awesome for our bodies if we eat raw beans. But cooked beans, like cooked kidney beans, can provide up to 33% if you have a half a cup of them. Seeds like pumpkin seeds, sesame, squash, they have a pretty good source of non-heme iron as well, but only about 11% of the daily recommended allowance. And now, as mentioned, broccoli, kale, spinach are traditionally rich in iron. But they only provide 5% of the RDA. So 1 ounce of kale, fresh kale, provides only 5%. So you're going to be after eating tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of kale salad to try to get all of your recommended daily iron. It's going to be a little rough. That's going to be a lot of kale. But I love kale as well. I eat it. But I realize that some other sources of the heme iron, like in red meats, which I also like, can give us a better bang for our buck, so to speak. One of the things I heard a few months back, it just cracked me up, was one of the guys world famous for his weightlifting and bodybuilding. He's in his 50s now. He was saying that Meat, or like red meat, for example, primarily, he was speaking of, is the original superfood, right? Our ancestors, for millennia have been eating meat, and that has so many nutrients in it. Iron is one of them, along with many, 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 many others, especially organ meats. If you eat the nose to tail approach, which is cool, you can really take advantage of all those nutrients. So anyway, the original superfood, red meat, but as mentioned, that's probably the most bang for your buck, so to speak, for iron. And if you don't like meat, or if you're vegan or vegetarian, that's fine too. I'm going to give you a lot of other ways you can be able to increase your iron in your diet with the dark green leafies, the beans, adding vitamin C, and even these seeds like we talked about, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds. If you're okay with eating some seafood, as I mentioned, the shellfish like the oysters, clams, and mussels have a decent amount as well. And then there's supplementation, which we can talk about towards the end. So iron is one of these things in our bodies that we absolutely need, 100%, but if we get too much of it, which is uncommon, but sometimes happens when people get over exuberant with their supplementation, or often in pediatric cases, I've seen a few in the 20 years of medicine I've been in with iron overload or iron toxicity acutely by taking a whole bunch of prenatal vitamins, which are stocked with iron. Oftentimes, kids sometimes will overdose on them unexpectedly because, sometimes they make them taste good and they just go crazy with it. So you want to be careful, right? The dark side, so to speak, or the overdose or the too much iron, which fortunately is pretty uncommon. It can be quite dangerous. It's sort of the Goldilocks phenomenon, right? Too little is not good. Too much also not good. But just the right amount is perfect, because iron in excess can be toxic. But as mentioned, the good thing is our body has a lot of mechanisms in place that usually will prevent this from happening unless we accidentally or purposefully take way, 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 way too much as an iron overdose. And that's particularly the way that I have seen it present, is with iron overdose. But that's fortunately very uncommon because our body regulates it, right? We have so many functions in our body that iron plays a key role in. The most important of which is the oxygen carrying throughout our body via the hemoglobin. And this is highly monitored in our blood, right? It's absorbed in the GI tract. There's special receptors. There's transferrin, which is a carrying molecule, hepcidin. There's all these things that are regulatory. And one that I'll talk about briefly because it's pretty interesting, and this kind of leads into a discussion on the supplementation of iron, is this regulatory hormone that we have called hepcidin. And it's responsible for keeping our iron stores in balance. And basically, if you get too much of, iron in your body, then this hormone, the hepcidin, C-I-D-I-N, is released to basically decrease or suppress the absorption of iron primarily in the GI tract. So if you eat too much of it, like you take a big giant amount, then it's going to basically suppress the absorption in the future. So this is kind of interesting because let's say you're supplementing with iron and your doctor, who is well-meaning, doesn't really understand this process very well. They might tell you to take iron every single day. They might tell you to take iron twice a day. Sometimes they even tell you to take it 3 times a day. And this doesn't work out well for a lot of reasons. One, iron kind of upsets the GI tract. It can make you nauseous. It can make you constipated. It can make you bloated. It has a lot of untoward side effects. So you don't want to take it too often just because it doesn't necessarily make you feel good. But also, if you take it 3 times a day, every time you take it, the body sees this increased amount of iron in the GI tract. And so it goes, hey, wait a minute. We might not need that much, so let's release hepcidin, which is the suppressive hormone which blocks the reabsorption of iron in the GI tract. So with every successive dose, you actually take in less and less. So it's super interesting. If you were to take iron once a day, let's say as 300 milligrams or something, as opposed to take iron 3 times a day in 100 milligram, increments, you would think that you would absorb the same amount, but you would actually absorb quite a bit less because of that phenomenon of the body seeing the initial rise in iron. The hepcidin, which is the counter-regulatory hormone, sees and says, hey, wait a minute, we don't want to overdose, we don't want to take in too much, so let's block the absorption. And so I would not recommend taking iron more than once a day. Take the whole thing together, whatever dose your doctor recommends, take it once a day, or preferentially, even better to take it every other day, because you won't have this hepcidin counter-regulatory hormone suppressing the absorption of iron. Because most likely if you're taking iron, it's because you're low in iron or anemic, and so you actually need the extra iron, but the body doesn't always understand that acutely, and when it sees those high iron levels, it's going to start to block the absorption. And so if you take it 2 and 3 times a day, each time you take it, you're getting less and less. But if you separate it by about 48 hours, that's time enough for this hepcidin counter-regulatory hormone suppression to kind of go down, and you'll be able to absorb the maximal amount. And, of course, you'll feel better, right? Because instead of taking it 3 times a day and having GI upset 3 times a day, maybe you'll get it only once every 2 days. So iron taken once every 2 days is going to be the most well-absorbed and also cause the least amount of GI side effects. And this is supplemental iron. This doesn't apply to the heme iron that you're eating in meats or you're taking in the non-heme iron and kale or whatever. It doesn't apply to that so much. We're talking about supplementation of iron. Sorry to skip to that, but it came to my mind, and it's super important. And a lot of physicians out there actually don't understand that, including the most common people to prescribe iron, which are primary care docs and OBGYNs. They often don't understand this phenomenon, which I don't hold against them, because honestly, in medical school, I don't think I learned it either. Because a lot of things we don't learn in medical school, a lot of things we do learn, but some of the nutritional stuff we learn about how to diagnose it, but maybe not how to best treat it. So as mentioned, if we do too much, it can be toxic. We don't want to overdo it, but fortunately, that's pretty unusual. Usually it's just an overdose on iron supplements. There are some disorders like hereditary hemochromatosis, which is a genetic disorder that's characterized by excessive absorption of iron. There's a couple other conditioning, one called African iron overload, and that was initially described in Africa. It can happen anywhere, but this is kind of cool. It was initially described and observed in Africa, where they were making homemade beer. And you know how they were brewing it? They were brewing it in cast iron, brewing it in iron pots, and so some of the iron was coming into the beer, and they were overdosing on dietary iron overload because of the pot. So it is possible to get too much iron. There's a lot of great things about iron pots and cast iron. I love to use them camping and things like that. But you need to watch how much iron you're getting. So checking your levels is a good idea, because you don't want to overdose, and you don't want to have chronic elevated iron levels, because they can contribute to chronic disease as well. Once again, we go back to the Goldilocks phenomenon, right? Too little, not good. Too much, not good. Right in the middle, we got to have just the right amount. But it's pretty easy to monitor through blood work that's common. And like I said, we have hormones in our body like the hepcidin that helps us as well. There's something in the stomach called intrinsic factor as well that helps with this. So usually the overdose part is not that common. But we need to understand it and be paying attention, because if we overdo it either with our diet or with supplementation, there can be some issues with iron overload. It's actually, just to kind of keep it simple, iron, as we know, is easily oxidized, right? Think if you had a pure iron and you put it outside, especially in Hawaii, literally in 24 hours, that thing would be rusted. It's unbelievable how quickly things rust in Hawaii, because our humidity is so high and the oxygen is rich. And so iron left, alone will want to bind oxygen, which if it's in your blood, that's an awesome thing, because we want to carry oxygen. But if it's just sitting around in overload situation, it gets oxidized and becomes what we call a free radical, if you will, and can cause oxidative damage and oxidative stress. And so too much iron can increase risk of chronic diseases like cancers, also infection, can be, more prevalent with iron overload, but also with too little iron. If you're super anemic, you can be more prone to infection. So once again, sort of the Goldilocks phenomenon here. You want to have just the right amount, but you don't want to overdo it, right? You don't want to acutely in one dose take too much, and you don't want to overdo it long-term either, because there is potentially a lot of issues there. But as mentioned, it's a pretty easy thing to monitor with very, very simple blood work. It's not something to get too worked up about, because it's easy to monitor with simple tests like your CBC, which is your complete blood count, which checks out the amount of iron, sort of through looking at the hemoglobin, right? The hemoglobin, which is the oxygen-carrying molecule in your blood, looks at your red blood cells, because if you're iron deficient, you're going to have a lower hemoglobin, you're going to have a lower hematocrit, you're going to have generally speaking, a smaller sized red blood cell. It's going to be less rich in that red color, right? Because it's got less heme, less oxygen. So it's going to be a more pale color and appearance when they look at it in the laboratory under the microscope. You're going to have lower levels of iron in the blood. You can measure that through a couple different ways. One is called your TIBC. You often will look at your iron levels with respect to things like ferritin. Ferritin's a little bit more tricky, because ferritin can be what they call an acute phase reactant. So it can go up in areas of inflammation. And so you have to be a little bit, have a background lens of what's also going on in the body. But usually you'll get iron studies which will include a serum iron, what's called a TIBC, which is the total iron binding capacity, and then you will also do a serum ferritin. So traditionally in iron deficiency anemia, you would have a low serum iron, like right? If you're anemic, you have a low iron, and usually a low ferritin. And ferritin is the iron storage form, ferritin can go up if you have certain types of chronic disease. Anemia of chronic disease could raise the ferritin levels because it's an acute phase reactant, which means that it goes up with inflammation. But typically, the classic findings would be not only the low H&H, hemoglobin, and hematocrit on the CBC, but you would also have a low serum iron and a low ferritin level, and you would have an elevated TIBC, which is the total iron binding capacity, right? You're going to want to grip and hold on to that iron very strongly because the iron is low, right? You want to hoard it, you want to hang on to it. So your TIBC would actually be elevated, the serum iron would be low, and the ferritin would be low. Those are the traditional findings, but like I said, the ferritin sometimes can be elevated in chronic conditions, like people that may have chronic disorders, anemia of chronic disease, inflammation that's chronic, if they had hepatitis or other things. But the classic finding, low iron, low ferritin, elevated TIBC, is pretty much sine qua non and diagnostic of iron deficiency anemia. So that's super, super common, usually either from chronic blood loss, like heavy periods in young women, or from poor nutritional intake. And that's probably the most common cause worldwide. And there's lots of other tests that can be done looking at other things, like if you think there might be a chance that you're losing iron in your stool, for example, if you had a stomach ulcer or something, you can usually identify that pretty readily with a stool test. They look for iron, or if your stool is real black and you're not taking any iron, then that could be a sign of a stomach ulcer. So pay attention to that. You can also look at your tissue lead concentrations, because if you have lead poisoning, that can also cause an anemia as well. This is a little bit of a different type of anemia, but it can affect it. This is like the paint from old homes that sometimes children will, pick at and chew on, and that can cause issues. Another test that's super helpful, but usually not needed, thank goodness, right? Because it wouldn't be a very comfortable test, would be that of the bone marrow aspiration. That sounds kind of gnarly, right? They put a needle in. Usually it's the side of your kind of hip area, this pelvic bone that sticks out because it's superficial to the skin, and they put a needle in there and they suck out some of the marrow. You've heard of like bone broth, right? Well, that's where the bone broth comes from. It's from the bone marrow. The bone innards, and to sample that, you got to put a needle in there, and then you can look at it under the microscope, and you can get a lot of good information to be able to look for the causes of this iron deficiency. And fortunately, as mentioned, it's not that commonly required, not really necessary. Most cases of iron deficiency anemia can be easily diagnosed just with the simple blood work that I mentioned earlier, the CBC, which is just the blood counts, as well as the iron level, the ferritin level, the TIBC that I mentioned, total iron binding capacity, and the serum ferritin. So it's not super hard in most people to figure it out, and it would be worth getting checked. So if you haven't gotten that checked and you're a little tired and you just don't have the energy that you wish you did, and it could be related to anemia, because like I said, almost 1 in 3 people worldwide have anemia, and a lot of young kids do, a lot of young women do, because they menstruate, obviously, and they lose iron through the form of blood loss on their period every single month. So get it checked out. You want to have at least a number 12 in the hemoglobin. You'd love it to be 13, 14, or even up to 15, but you want to have 12 on the hemoglobin as a minimum. And if you don't, let's talk about supplementation. There's lots of different supplements out there. Ferrous sulfate's probably the most common one. I don't really have time to get into all the different types. There's just so many out there. But going back to what I said at the outset, if you do need to take supplementation and you're going to take an iron-specific supplementation that's not in, like, for example, a multivitamin, and you're taking iron alone, like ferrous sulfate is probably the most common one, take it alone. A big glass of water. Take it every other day, ideally, so your body can absorb it the best. And take the amount that your doctor wants, like the total amount, I should say. So instead of taking 100 milligrams 3 times a day, take the 325, which is the common dose. Take it all at once in the morning. And if you're really, really low on iron, you could even take 2 of those in the morning together and do that every other day to maximize your absorption. And within 1 week's time, you'll see some improvement, but usually about 2 weeks, you should see at least a full 1-point elevation in your hemoglobin. So if you were a little bit iron deficient and you had anemia, your hemoglobin, let's say, was 11, after 2 weeks of supplementation, you should be up to about 12, which is equivalent roughly to a whole unit of blood that would be transfused, like in the ER, for example, if you were having a bleeding ulcer or bleeding from some other source and you dropped your hemoglobin a bunch and you were dying of blood loss, we would give you, the packs, or the units is the quantity of blood, and raising your hemoglobin by 1 point is roughly equivalent to a whole blood transfusion of 1 unit. So let's try to avoid at all costs, if we can, blood transfusions, and try to up our iron naturally, which can easily be done through supplementation. Like I said, every other day, ideally every 48 hours, is going to be much more effective. You could take it with a little bit of vitamin C, which would enhance the absorption. Don't take it with calcium, because that'll decrease the absorption. There's a lot of other nuance to it, but talk to your doctor about it. Get your blood levels checked, see where you're at, because there's no reason you should be going about your day anemic and low energy if there is something you can do about it, because at the end of the day, 100%, we can do something about it. We can change this. This is so common, so stinking common. Like I said, almost 1 in 3 people worldwide have this deficiency, and now that you're educated in this, you should not have to continue to live this way. You can do something about it. You can change it. You can change it pretty easily. This can be done with supplementation. For me, I just take a multi that has some iron in it, because I am not significantly iron deficient. But for others, they might need to take actual iron supplement, like ferrous sulfate or something, and do so, I would recommend every other day, because you'll absorb it better. You can throw in a little vitamin C with it. Vitamin C is good for a lot of other reasons, but it'll also increase your iron absorption. And if you just want to do it with diet, that's what I try to do. I love the green leafy vegetables the thick spinaches, the deep greens, kale, and I love meat. I eat good, wholesome, natural heme in the form of grass-fed, grass-finished beef. You know, I had my bison burger the other day. I had some tri-tip. I buy occasionally hot dogs, and they're from Teton Waters Ranch, which I don't get any kickbacks from, but I like it because they are grass-fed and they are grass-finished. They even sneak a little bit of veggies in there. Don't tell the kids, but they sneak in some mushrooms in there as well. So it's kind of a cool recipe, grass-fed and finished. And that way you can get your heme. So until next time, a big aloha and get your heme.